And here we go. Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. I muted everybody, I hope. Don't take it personally. I can't afford the therapy. Tonight is Tuesday. We have our special guest, and tonight we have a very special guest from right here, Rabbi Levi Bukiet, who had the great zchus of being at the Rebbe's Seder. And as we are here in the mode of getting ready for Pesach, I thought this is a great time to ask him, and he agreed, and I appreciate that. Didn't give me a hard time to join us and to share some of his memories of what it was meant to be at the Rebbe Seder. So, Rabbi Bukiet, first of all, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. So, Darabah.
Thank you very much. Welcome all.
So, take us back. What years are we talking about that you were able to be at the Rebbe Seder? And give us a little bit of a thumbnail. And bear in mind, not everybody here has been to 770, and not everybody may be familiar with all the lingo. So if you could really lay out what was the years that we're talking about, and what was the process through that you were allowed to, or other people were allowed to be at the Rebbe Seder.
So again, we as growing up in our home, we lived a distance from Crown Heights. We lived in a neighborhood called East Flatbush. So we weren't always privileged to be at the Rebbe Seder, and if we did come, we came very, very late towards the very end of the Seder, because the fact that we lived far away and whatever, and we couldn't go on our own. We had to go with our father, and our father couldn't leave so early, so we really wasn't there at the early stages of the Seder. However, I want to emphasize 1 year, and here we were older. Myself, I was 17. I had two older brothers, 18 and 19. And this is the year 1969 that we made our own Seder at home. And we actually woke early to 770. And the first night we got there, when the Rebbe was holding by Manishtana, there was a fairly big crowd already in the room. However, the second night, which was very unique, we were 8 people alone, besides the people that were around the table, the guests that were sitting by the Seder, but there was only 8 of us throughout the entire Seder until after the grace of mail.
Okay, so let's get a little picture here. First of all, this is where? In the Rebbe's home, in the synagogue? Like, just give us the layout.
Okay, this is in 770, the famous building 770. The Rebbe had his office on the first floor. Right outside the Rebbe's office was a staircase that led up to the second floor and the third floor. The second floor was the residence of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Rebbe's father-in-law and mother-in-law. And as a good son-in-law, he would eat every Yom, not Shabbos, but every Yom Tov meal, including Pesach, he would eat by his in-laws. And that was always the case. And even after the previous Rebbe passed on, he would still come to his mother-in-law, and he would conduct the Seder or the Yom Tov meals throughout the year in the previous Rebbe's apartment, which is on the second floor.
Okay, so you're on the second floor, you're in the dining room. I mean, approximately how big are we talking about? Is the table 12 feet long, 30 feet long? Give us like a little bit of the layout, what it looked like.
It wasn't a very large room. It was, you came in through the doorway. It was a long hallway. Of course, on that same floor, the previous Rebbe had his bedroom and had his office. And then towards the back of 770, maybe you went through a long hallway, there was a room there, the dining room. I would say it wasn't a very large room, approximately 15 feet by 25 feet. And that's where the Seder was conducted. That was actually where the previous Rebbe had his Seders. That's where the previous Rebbe had his gatherings, his Farbrengens there. Again, this goes back in the 40s, when there wasn't such a large crowd of Hasidim in Brooklyn yet, in Crown Heights. So the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, had his gatherings, known as Farbrengens, in that very same room.
So we all know that the opening paragraph of the Seder reads, all who are hungry come and eat. I think it's a very strong Jewish tradition to invite guests. How did somebody get eligible to be a guest? It was just anybody could show up, and there was a full. They sat, ate the meal, the matzah, the 4 cups, asked the questions, had conversation, or you were just more like an observer.
Okay, so there were people that the Rebbe had 10 people. The Rebbe would sit by a Seder, and likewise the Yontiv meals with 1,000,000 people, with 10 people. And I think that was including the 2 helpers that assisted in dishing out the food and helping during the meal. Those people were invited. Those people, you had to get an invitation, and they were primarily older Chassidim, for example, the Seder, the cantor, the one that sang the Agada, that said the Agada, was a native of Chicago, Rabbi Yankel Katz. So he came with his son, who was a bachelor at the time, and they were invited to the Seder. And they were invited for many years. He was an actual cantor. He recited the Haggadah loud and conducted the Seder. The Rebbe didn't conduct the Seder. He conducted the Seder. Those people were invited guests. However, the doors were open, and anybody and anyone can come in and join the Seder.
Were the women at the Seder? Was the previous Rebbe's wife, who was still living, was she there? Was the Rebbe's wife there? Were there women there too?
Of course there were women, but not in the room where the men were. There was a side room. There was a side room in the corner. There was another room there. And that's where, until 1965, the Rebbe's mother sat there, the Rebbe's wife, the previous Rebbe's wife, Rabbi Garari's wife. There was a Russian helper that helped out. There was a room of women that sat separately in a separate room. You actually didn't see them even. The only time I think the door was opened was when the men made Kiddush, when the Rebbe made Kiddush. And I don't even think they heard. It was such a distance away. And especially if there was a crowd there, they conducted their home Seder on their own. The Rebbe was sitting amongst the 10 people, and all those that were gathered around and around in the room.
Okay, so give us a picture here. We're accustomed to our Seders. There's conversation, there's questions. There's the youngest kid stands on a chair. He asks the 4 questions. We sing the songs. And so, was it like that? Was there conversation? Was there singing, or was it much more serene and quiet? What was it like?
Okay, it was very serene. It was very serene. The Rebbe would come in. He'd bring his own matzahs from his office upstairs, and they were wrapped in like brown paper. He would come up. Everyone already had their Seder prepared. They'd all stand in respect while the Rebbe would prepare his Seder plate. And that was a whole process. That's where most of the rituals and the customs and what you could observe was then. And the Rebbe preparing his own Seder plate. Now, they had displayed in front of him all the items that are needed for the Seder plate. And he would go through item by item. First, he would read the Agada, the instructions, how to do it. And then he'd go about doing each item. And while this was happening, everyone was standing in respect around the table, and no one said a word. You didn't have peep. Now, again, the second Seder that we were there, we were 8 of us, besides the people that were invited. We were 8 of us throughout the entire night. It was incredible. No pushing, no shoving. It was, you could observe every nuance and every little detail of what the Rebbe was doing. The Rebbe was very, very meticulous and very neat in how he did things. He used a lot of napkins in preparing the kaida. He literally, during the time when he would make the kaida, now, interesting.
The Seder plate, talking about organizing the Seder plate.
Yeah, the Seder plate. So when he would make the moror, so he used for moror and the chazeres was the same way. Basically, what he did, he would take a chunk of ground horseradish that was prepared in front of him. He would put it into the palm of his hand, and he would literally squeeze out all the moisture and water under the table and make it into a size like an egg. And in addition to that, he would take a chunk of horseradish that wasn't grounded, and he tuck it in amongst the ground. And that's how he would prepare, and then he would wrap it in the salad, the Roman lettuce, whatever it was. But then, because his hand was a little dirty, a little moisture, he would literally walk himself to the kitchen. Everything he did on his own. There was nothing was served to him. He literally went himself to the kitchen. He washed his hands. He dried his hands, came back, continued making the kaira, say the plate. Then again, when it came to chazeres, again he had to do the same procedure. Again, his hand got a little moist and dirty. He would walk himself to the kitchen, wash his hands, dry his hands, and come back. And throughout this whole time, this took about a half hour or so, this whole process. The Rebbe, everyone stood in attention. I think the Rebbe motioned to his brother-in-law that was right across of them, which was a gentleman that was 10 years older than him. The Rebbe motioned to him to take a seat. And of course, he wouldn't take a seat. He stood the entire time in respect of the Rebbe.
So then they sit down. You got the Seder plates, and then there's one man. He read the Haggadah, this Rabbi Katz. Did the Rebbe make his own kiddush? Everybody made kiddush. How did that?
The Rebbe made first kiddush. The Rebbe did everything first. He waited on until everyone finished theirs. He didn't continue anything until everybody finished theirs. And that was true throughout the meal. Even when it came to when they dished out the food, he was served first, but he wouldn't begin to eat until everyone else around the table was given the food. And even to the extent that the people who were helping out had to sit down and as well be ready to eat. And that's when he first would eat. And it was a little tricky because the Rebbe really didn't eat much during the Seder. Of course, he ate what you had to eat, whether it's the matzah, the maror, the kairach, and all that stuff. That he ate in great sum. I mean, it was a great measurements, and he was very meticulous to make sure that he covered all the bases, all the measurements that would have to be. But when it came to the food item, which basically was they served fish, and then there was soup, and then there was a main course, chicken, and then there was, of course, a dessert, sort of you call it kompot, a fruit cocktail. The only thing that the Rebbe ate very well and really ate it was the fish and the kompot and the fruit cocktail. When it came to the soup, he took maybe 2 tablespoons of soup and stopped. When it came to the chicken, he took 2 nibbles of the chicken and he stopped. And the interesting part is, as soon as Rebbe stopped eating, everyone has to stop. He didn't start until he started, and when he ended, you couldn't continue. So everyone sort of went hungry from the Seder. The only thing that you could eat well, and the Rebbe ate well, was the fish and the kompot. Now, throughout the entire Seder, the Rebbe, there was no discussions. There was no talking during the Seder, and there was no talking during the meal, during the Suda. Now, that's different than when it came to the Yontiv meal during the day. There were discussions. But at the Seder, during the Haggadah, there was no discussion, and during the meal, there was no discussion. It was very quiet. It was a very surreal and very elegant, everyone was very quiet, respectful. There was no chit-chat. There was no talking whatsoever. The Rebbe himself, interesting, because this cantor would go on and on and on. He would sing that Haggadah loud and verbalize every letter and every word. It took a while. So the Rebbe had brought with him a few Haggadahs to the Seder. And so he would read off the Haggadah, like from after the Manishtana, where the Haggadah begins, by Wada Meinu, until the next station, Vihisha Amda, was a time when you pick up the cup and you sing. He would read that all off quickly, while the cantor would chant, and he would meanwhile looking in his svarim. He would look into his books. And when it came to Vishamda, he would join again the crowd and saying Vishamda.
Who were some
And
of
that
these other
happened
people?
after Vishamda, until it came to the Makkis, the spilling of the wine by the 10 plagues. Again, the cantor would sing on and on and on, take his time, and the Rebbe would sort of glance quickly through the Agada, read off quickly, and then he would sit back and look into his Agada that he wrote and the other Agadas that he brought with him, and he would do he would study, basically.
So the people who were invited, who were actually seated around the table, were these people who lived in Crown Heights? These were elders. They were the same people every year. Like they signed up for it. I mean, how did you get that opportunity?
That I don't know how they got it, but there were most of them that I know were people that had no wives. They were elderly men who had no wives. They were older Chassidim, a lot of them, and I wouldn't say from the greatest sheikhs in Lubavitch, but they whatever they lived in Crown Heights,
and they were alone,
and they were part of the Seder. And then of course Rabbi Yankel Katz, who did have a wife. I don't know where she spent the Seder, but he was there with his son.
Wow. So we all are familiar with the Seder. It says, that they would go until the morning Shema. Like, give us a rough time. Like, what time did it start? It seems like it went so maybe a little more quickly than we're accustomed to for our long Seders. And we're saying, different stories and so on. What's the basic time frame for start to finish?
The start to finish, I would say the Rebbe would start his Seder. Well, the first night, it would start a little later than the second night. Because the first night, the Rebbe, before he would go conduct his own Seder, he would go around and visit the various different Seders in the community, like the Yeshiva boys. Then he would go to Machon Chana, the girls' the seminary. He would go then to Adar Torah, and then the Russian program. So he'd make the rounds and visit all these Seders and give a blessing at each one. He made certain remarks when he walked in. He visited, he spoke to people a little bit, and then he would come back and he'd come upstairs to his Seder. The Seder would roughly start out, it didn't go very long. It started roughly about 9 p.m. and would go to roughly about 12:30, 1 o'clock.
Okay, so we're semi-accustomed to maybe even a little shorter, like you're describing. But that's fascinating. Again, I guess at that time, yeshiva students didn't just jump on a plane and fly home like we're accustomed to it. They would stay in the yeshiva for Pesach. We're sort of thinking, everybody goes home. But I guess in 1950s and 60s, it wasn't like he just got on a flight, and went back to Israel, or parents were in France or wherever they were. You were sort of really in the yeshiva for Pesach, and the women as well.
Well, a lot of Bachar didn't go home for Pesach, even though they lived in America, elsewhere, because for two reasons. A lot of them wanted to be by the Seder of the Rebbe, and second of all, because the second night of Pesach, at 1:30 in the morning, the Rebbe would have a farbrengen.
1:30 in the morning.
Come down, and he would expound and elaborate on the Haggadah from 1:30 to about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning.
Oh my gosh!
So no one wanted to miss that. So a lot of
boys.
Okay,
so then the Rebbe finishes the Seder. The Rebbe finishes the Seder, then comes into the study hall and has a whole farbrengen in the middle of the night.
Right, and that went on until 1971. As soon as his mother passed away, in 71, she passed away. That's when he stopped conducting the meals and the Seder upstairs anymore. His mother-in-law wasn't there. And then he went home, and once he went home, he didn't come back.
Wow, so you got in the last couple of years. You said 70 was the last year. You were there 69. Yep. Okay, you mentioned to us, I don't want to keep you much longer, and if people have any questions, they're free to unmute and jump in. But you mentioned one custom where the Rebbe would squeeze the maror. Any other nuances, any other something that maybe we're not familiar with that's not printed there that you could share with us that you noticed?
Yeah. So there are a couple of things I noticed. First of all, when we came to the makkos, to the plagues, where you spill the wine into a broken plate, So typically everyone has it on the table. And you take your cup. Now Chabad custom is not to take your finger and somehow
Dip it.
And dip it, but you actually spill out from your becher, from your cup, into the broken plate. The Rebbe would not put the broken plate on the table. He would have the broken plate on the floor next to his feet.
Wow.
And he'd take the cup, the becher, and he would bend down and he would spill the wine for the 10 plagues into the broken plate that was laying on the floor.
Okay, interesting. Any other little subtleties that you may have picked up on that maybe people aren't familiar with?
Yeah, again, a lot of these customs that the Rebbe did is documented already and printed in many different places. So, and there were people there that were there many more years than I was there, older than me.
When you were there, just as a student, you're a teenager, did the Rebbe sort of acknowledge you? Or you just were totally standing off to the side? No comments.
I was just an interesting story because quickly, why was there only 8 people at the second Seder? What happened to the crowd? The night before there was a crowd, and all of a sudden the second Seder, no one was there. Well, interesting enough, the first Seder was a huge crowd. I mean,
this is 1969, right? We're talking about 69.
Yeah, 1969. The first, you're talking about a room that can hold maybe 100 people. There was like 500 people in that room. Yeah, there were tables and benches and boxes and everyone. It was terrible. It was terrible. I don't know how the people sat around the table. Besides the Rebbe, of course, you didn't stand behind the Rebbe. And of course, you wouldn't stand behind the chair where the previous Rebbe sat. That was empty. But the rest of the room was jam-packed up to the ceiling. People were holding on to the ceiling. It was so cluttered. It was so packed. So what happened was the first night, they broke a window, I think. They broke a table. And so the Rebbe, next morning, to Shachris, called over Rabbi David Raskin, who was the mentor, the spiritual mentor of the yeshiva, and called him over right after Shachris, and had him go up on the bima, on the platform in the middle of the shul, and was screaming and yelling that no one should have the chutzpah and even try to come tonight to the Seder. The Seder is off limits. The Rebbe does not want anybody to be there by the Seder. And so no one came. I don't know what got into the Bukiet boys. We decided we're coming. And we actually came before the Rebbe even came up to the Seder. That's how early we came. And when we came there was another 3 guys standing by the door. And what happened basically in a nutshell, we were standing by the door, and all of a sudden the door opened, and the Rebbe's wife was going downstairs to the Rebbe's office. And when she opened the door and she passed us, of course she said in Yiddish, "You have no reason to stand here because you're not going to be allowed into the Seder tonight." I think the women there, the Rebbitzins, were upset what happened last night, and so I don't think it was the Rebbe didn't want the boys to come to the Seder. I think it was more they didn't want, and the Rebbe had to follow. So I remember one of the boys piped up and said to her, "Did the Rebbe say that? Is that it?" And she gave him a very stern look, and she didn't respond. She went downstairs. We heard her; you could hear everything. She went downstairs. You could hear the door of the Rebbe's office opening. She went in and seemed like the Rebbe gave her matzahs for the Seder. She came back up, and she didn't say anything to us, and she went through. Then about 20 minutes later, again the door opened, and again the Rebbe's wife appeared, and seemingly she went down this time to inform the Rebbe that everyone's ready, that he can come up. So she again passed through us, and again she repeated the very same thing again. "You have nothing to stand here because you are not going to be allowed into the Seder." She went down to the Rebbe's office. She was there a very short time, and then all of a sudden you heard the door opening, and now you heard 2 footsteps. It was, of course, the Rebbetzin walking first, and about 10 feet behind the Rebbetzin, the Rebbe was walking. And the Rebbe was holding in his 2 hands, very gently, he was holding in his 2 hands and wrapped in a paper, the matzahs that he was bringing to the Seder. And under his armpit, he had the 3 swarm tucked under his armpit. So basically, he was like, he had the matzah he was holding with both hands, and the swarm was tucked under his thing. The Rebbetzin came to the door, and by the door was standing there the previous Rebbetzin, the Chamadina, the previous Rebbe's wife, the Russian caretaker, and now, of course, the Rebbe's wife, Chaimushka. And they were all standing by the door ready. As soon as the Rebbe would walk in, they would slam the door. So what happened when they came to the Rebbetzin walked in, so her mother, Rebbetzin Chamadina, wanted to close the door already. And we heard her say to her mother, Mama, the man gate. Mother, my husband is coming. Because the Rebbe was literally 10, 15 feet behind her. The Rebbe came through. He was very serious. He had his matzah in his hands, the swarm tucked under his armpit. He looked at us. He nodded to us like good yontif. Didn't say anything. He nodded to us like good yontif. He looked at us. As soon as he went through the threshold of the door, so he wanted to motion to us that we can come in. So he, holding the matzahs with his 2 hands, he motioned with his arm and moved his arm that we should come in. So when that happened, it was interesting to watch. So the previous Rebbe's wife was pushing the door to close. The Rebbe's wife, who realized that the Rebbe motioned with his arm that we should come in, was pulling back the door to open the door. Of course, we followed the Rebbe behind us. We were running. And I remember the Rebbe Chaim Mushke said, you have nothing to run. What are you running for? There's only 8 of us. You know, what's left? You have to for life. You have nothing to run. And that's how we got in. And that's how we remained. The doors remained locked until after benching, until after Grace of Meal, when you had to open the door for Elijah, the prophet Elijah, and that's when the crowd, that's when havoc broke out. And the room, they came with benches and tables and chairs and boxes. And in no time, the room was jam-packed. But up until after benching, it was beautiful. You heard the dancing and singing from the boys downstairs. They were carrying on downstairs, screaming and yelling and singing. But the Rebbe did not open the door. And what happened was that when it came to after benching, so Chaim Baruch, who was one of the people there at the door, went over to the Rebbe and said, what do we do? You know, if I open the door, they're going to come in like maniacs. They're going to barge in. The Rebbe said, what can you do? What can you do? You got to open the door. You got to do shver chamas. You got to let the prophet Elijah in. You can't keep him out. So that's what happened.
That's
crazy. Up until then, it was an unbelievable experience. I don't think in the history of Lubavitch there has been a Seder where only 8 people were there.
Amazing, amazing. Okay, unless somebody has a question, we're going to say thank you, Rabbi Bukiet. Really gave us a lot to vision, you know, like being at the Rebbe Seder, and we're all getting in ready for Pesach. And so those customs and those memories, we really, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for sharing. Unless somebody has a question. Nira, you want to jump in with a question?
Thank you very much for the insights. It's amazing. One small question. You mentioned that he barely ate. He took 2 spoonfuls from the soup and 2 bites from the chicken, and he only read the Haggadah. There was no any elaboration or explanation. How come it took so long?
Well, what took so long for every ritual, like eating the matzah, he took time. Everything that was a must that you're obligated to do during the Seder, by him, he was very meticulous. And he took time. He took time in preparing himself. All the rituals, the washing of the hands, and the drying of his hand took time. Everything was precise. Everything was so to the smallest detail. He followed. He read everything from God before he did it. He read it loud. So that took time. Every ritual took time. It's not like he just ate the matzah. No. The way he sat down, the way he leaned, and the way he ate it, and the time it took. It was all precise. It was all accurate to the T.
Beautiful.
Just end up with a very nice thing.
Yes, please.
At the very end of the Seder. Now, here we talked about this Rabbi Yankel Katz who conducted the Seder up until benching. But when it came after benching, and you have the Hallel and all the various different Psalms, here the Rebbe took over. And it was incredible. He read it loud. He was emotional. He sang it. One verse high, one verse low. There was such an expression of emotions and fervor from the Rebbe that was unbelievable. He was shaking. He was waving with his hands. He was singing it loud. It was unbelievable. It was like a different person from before and after. Up until benching, he was very quiet. You didn't hear a peep from him. Nothing. Besides, you watched him closely, how he did the custom, the rituals, and everything that he did to the T. But after benching, when he said that God after benching, wow. He was singing loud. He took over the crowd. He was singing loud, and he would motion with his hands, and he would shake in his chair. Very emotional, very into it.
Beautiful. Rabbi, thank you. This has been wonderful. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Okay. We wish you a Chag Kosher V'Sameach. Thank you for sharing this, and keep on sharing these great stories with so